I'm David Adams, and I want you to come with me on an epic journey.
I'm fascinated by the rise of empires and the bitter, bloody dynastic struggles that tore them apart. Timur, the sword of Islam. Edgar, king of all the English. Attila the Hun, and Charlemagne, the father of Europe. All built vast empires that dominated our world before they fell, destroyed from within by vicious family infighting. A barbarian leader takes on the greatest civilization of the 5th century.
This city was the enemy's stronghold.
And plunders untold wealth to fund his ambitions.
And he also believed he received another huge payment, this time to spare Rome.
Before his sons turn on one another.
They're wanting their own armies so they can fight their brother.
The final outcome is bloodshed, betrayal, and the end of empire. Over 1,500 years ago, the most feared man in Europe gathers his mounted army and prepares to put a great civilization to the sword.
I'm on the great Hungarian plain, deep in the heart of modern Hungary. This is the homeland of one of the world's greatest conquerors. From these steppe lands, he swept down like an avalanche and invaded ancient Rome.
This is Attila the Hun, known as the scourge of God for the devastation he rains down on the Christian nations of Europe. A ferocious warrior, his enemies see him as a barbarian. But Attila is a master strategist with an exceptional political mind. His power depends on leading a volatile alliance of tribes that live in Hun territory. Statecraft and deal-making, as much as fighting prowess, build his remarkable empire. Originally from Central Asia, the Huns are nomads who migrate westwards, conquering territory as they go. At its height, Attila's empire stretches from the Black Sea right across into present-day Germany. He hopes to lay the foundations of a glorious warrior dynasty. But with Europe at his mercy, Attila dies. And in less than 15 years, his empire disappears. But in what was once Attila's heartland, Hungary, there remains evidence of his unbreakable warrior spirit, 1,500 years on. At Lajos Kasai's school in southern Hungary, the deadly art of horseback combat survives.
De ezt tudjuk, hogy nagyon jó lovagoltak, nagyon jó ijásztak, és a világ legjobb lovas ijászai voltak.
What is the connection today to Attila?
Az a nép, amelyik elvágja a gyökereit, az halott. Nagyon fontos minden népnél, hogy a gyökerekkel együtt tudjon élni, és a magyar nép gyökerei azok messze nyúlnak vissza, és mi ezeket a hagyományokat próbáljuk fenntartani és ápolni.
The Huns live on their horses. Riding without a saddle, they hold meetings, eat meals, and even sleep on their mounts. And they fight on horseback too. riding flat out and using bows with a range of over 200 meters, they can easily outmaneuver traditional armies marching in formation. At the start of the 5th century, Attila is born into this warrior culture. He trains in these martial arts alongside his older brother, Bleda. The start of a lifelong rivalry. Accounts describe very different characters. Bleda is wild and unpredictable. Attila is more serious-minded. Both are groomed to become battlefield leaders. Their two uncles are joint rulers, and while this power-sharing arrangement often caused conflict, it was Hun tradition. Another custom is more extreme, a form of psychological warfare used to terrify the enemy. The evidence is found here at Vienna's Natural History Museum. Dr. Karen Wiltschke has studied Hun skeletal records. They show that Hun children often had their skulls bound, elongating their heads and giving them an alarming appearance.
So what do they actually do to change a baby's skull?
This has to be done in the very early childhood. So I have here a newborn, and the bones is still movable. You bind it very strictly, very tense, and then the skull, until the 3rd year of life, the skull grows very, very fast. The skull just can grow in a certain direction.
So is it possible that Attila and his sons would have actually had these elongated heads?
I think some coins are with his profile. So, and there is a very strange skull on it, so this could be a skull deformation.
It makes them look quite terrifying.
I'm sure they used it as a mean of transmitting that we are strong.
Intimidating, highly mobile, and battle-hardened, the Huns are a ferocious military power. By 434, that power is wielded by the unlikely pairing of Attila and Bleda. In keeping with Hun tradition, they become joint leaders after their uncles die in battle. Their ambitions now lie beyond Hun borders. The Roman Empire had dominated Europe and Western Asia for over 400 years. It was one of the most advanced civilizations the world had seen. But keeping it running was a huge financial and logistical challenge. And the institutions that maintained order, like the army and the state bureaucracy, had grown corrupt and ineffective, leaving the empire vulnerable to a force like the Huns. 2 centuries earlier, the Roman Empire had split in two, creating separate Western and Eastern Roman empires. To the north, where the Danube marked the border with the Huns, Attila watches every move the Eastern Roman Empire makes. The relationship between the Huns and the Romans is constantly shifting. Attila trades and even fights alongside them. But despite these ties, Attila is guided by one principle: self-interest.
The Eastern Roman Empire had faced ongoing unrest thousands of kilometres away in North Africa. And in a move that would become Attila's calling card, he sees the chance to exploit the empire's weakness.
He does so where the Morava River meets the Danube. 1,500 years ago, this was the site of Magus, a thriving Roman border town. Great fortunes are made here, taking goods east and west from the Black Sea deep into the heart of Europe. And its wealth makes it a tempting target. Today, Belgrade, capital of Serbia, has replaced Magus as the thriving port on this stretch of the Danube. The Roman Empire relies on towns like this to fill its coffers. For years, they've paid an annual tribute to the Huns to guarantee peace and avoid disruption to their lucrative trade networks. But in 435, Attila and his brother decide it's time to put the price up. Attila does all the negotiating, and he manages to raise the price that the Romans pay the Huns to 240 kilos of gold. But that's not all of it. He forces them to hand over deserters who'd taken refuge in Roman territory. And in return, the Huns promise not to attack their neighbours. It's a bit like getting a burglar to look after your house. It just shows you how much the Romans feared Attila and his Huns. This extraordinary deal would become known as the Treaty of Magus. Often portrayed as a primitive barbarian, this treaty shows Attila in a very different light. He's a clever strategist and the master of driving a hard bargain. An uneasy peace holds for 6 years. Then in 441, according to legend, an unlikely boat trip sparks a ferocious clash between Attila and the Romans. Hello.
Oh,
Ollie.
hello, David.
How are you? Dobar dan.
Dobar dan, dobar dan.
Are we ready?
Yes, idemo.
I realize that river is a lot bigger than I was expecting.
Yes.
Local fisherman Jolly is lending me his boat so I can recreate that fateful trip.
Be careful.
The Huns are suspicious of those spreading the Roman Empire's religion, Christianity, and perhaps with good reason.
Good luck.
Thank you. Scandalous allegations are made that a bishop has crossed into Hun territory to steal treasure. Now, so the story goes, the Bishop of Magus set out across the river. Now, his mission was to raid some tombs on the other side. But they weren't just anybody's tombs. They were the tombs of Attila's family. Now that was going to cause a lot of trouble. Bleda and Attila were obviously furious, and they demanded that the bishop be handed over. But the emperor refused. By doing so, he was falling into a trap set by Attila. The Roman emperor, Theodosius, had recently sent troops from the area to deal with the conflict in North Africa. Attila knew the border along the Danube was now weak and vulnerable to attack. And these grave-robbing charges give Attila and Bleda what they really want, an excuse to start a war. They declared the Treaty of Magus null and void, and then they unleashed hell across the Danube. In the 5th century, Attila the Hun controls the most destructive military force of his time. From his base in Hungary, he proves equally skillful making deals as he is at waging war. He extracts a fortune from the Eastern Roman Empire in exchange for peace, only to break this treaty and send his army across the river Danube to attack Roman cities. At first, the Eastern Roman Emperor, Theodosius, believes the clashes along the Danube are just a border skirmish. But this will turn into a lengthy campaign that will push his empire to breaking point. Vemenatium is one of the border towns targeted by Attila. Excavations here have uncovered a large, heavily fortified settlement. The dig team are unearthing one of the defensive walls that failed to keep Attila out. Beyond these walls, his army would have found a busy market, Roman baths, and even a theatre. A wealthy town, perfect for plundering.
Viminacium was one of the first cities that Attila and Bleda hit, and the population was almost completely decimated. Amazingly, the city did survive and it rebuilt. But further south, other towns weren't so lucky. 100 years later, reports said that the cities were still in ruins and skeletons could still be seen scattered in the fields.
The Huns lay waste to the entire region. They sack more than 100 towns deep into Roman territory, destroying crops, buildings and water supplies as they go, making life intolerable for any survivors. Attila declares, "There where I have passed, the grass will never grow again." Together, Attila and Bleda seize great riches and push back the weakened Roman border by over 200 kilometers. But behind their success, tension is growing between the joint rulers. One theory is that Bleda failed to treat affairs of state with the same importance as his strategic-minded brother. Then Attila puts a brutal end to the Hun system of power sharing.
Attila shatters the Hun tradition of dual leadership. He organizes for his older brother Bleda to be assassinated.
There are conflicting accounts of Bleda's death. Some suggest he died in battle, but most believe the evidence points to Attila and that he killed his brother on a hunting trip. Bleda isn't the only one written out of the history books. His sons disappear too, and it seems likely that Attila eliminates them to clear the path for his own 3 heirs.
With Bleda out of the way, Attila's sons will likely inherit the empire. But do they have what it takes? The battle for succession has already begun. The 3 brothers are now locked in a struggle to succeed their father. Elak is the oldest, which puts him in prime position. His name even means king. Then comes Dengizic. He's reserved and conscientious. The youngest is Ernak, who Attila shows the most affection for. It's likely their father takes them on military campaigns, turning the battlefield into a classroom where they can sharpen their fighting skills, and Attila can decide which one should succeed him. At their father's side, the brothers also learn firsthand how to take on a powerful enemy as Attila advances deeper into the Eastern Roman Empire. Attila's campaign takes him into the heart of Roman territory. His ultimate target is here, Constantinople, modern-day Istanbul. This city was the enemy's stronghold, capital of the Eastern Roman Empire.
and home to Attila's rival, Emperor Theodosius, who would build a church on this exact spot. And soon after, it would be rebuilt into this, the Hagia Sophia. And it represents exactly what Attila was up against, a great imperial power with the sort of riches he was desperate to get his hands on. In 447, Constantinople is hit by an enormous earthquake that damages the city's defences, built by Theodosius to keep barbarian invaders at bay. Attila heads here and defeats Roman forces on the outskirts of the city. But the Hun army isn't as mobile as it once was, and its progress is slowed by taking heavy siege equipment into battle. When Attila finally arrives, he finds the city walls have been repaired. Attila makes a tactical decision. Rather than wasting time laying siege to the city, he loots and pillages the surrounding area instead. Eventually, Emperor Theodosius asks for a peace treaty. And here, in the heart of the city, envoys from both sides begin negotiations. A decade earlier, Attila had extracted a steep price in return for a truce. But now, with the city at his mercy, he could charge any figure he liked. To save Constantinople and end the conflict, the emperor paid 1,000 kilos of gold a year. It was an astronomical price, and 3 times what he'd originally paid to keep the peace. These payments make Attila a billionaire of his day. But he's more interested in the gold's strategic value to secure the continued support of the different tribes in his army. They come from within the borders of the Hun Empire and fight alongside Attila's men. But their loyalty depends on being rewarded handsomely. And now they will enjoy a big payday. With this extortionate deal, Attila is building his own empire while driving another to ruin. It's said that the nobles of Constantinople are forced to pawn their wives' jewelry to service the deal. And Emperor Theodosius knows that keeping up with payments will eventually cripple the city. With his options running out, the Roman emperor now starts plotting to assassinate Attila. He plans to hit the great leader where he least expects it, deep in his heartland, in what is today Hungary. From here, Attila conducts affairs of state and entertains guests. While nothing of it remains today, that hasn't stopped people reliving the sights and sounds of Attila's time. Every few years, the descendants of Attila and the Huns get together. They come from Kazakhstan, they come from all over Hungary, just to celebrate their extraordinary culture. The year is 449, and Attila and his army have returned to the great Hungarian plain on a welcome break from military action. It's at this moment an assassin sent by the Romans arrives under the cover of a diplomatic mission. Edico is Attila's ambassador to the Eastern Roman Empire, but he agrees to kill the Hun leader in exchange for a life of luxury in Constantinople. Edico arrives at Attila's camp with envoys from Constantinople and a Roman historian called Priscus. Now, the Huns left no written record, but thanks to Priscus, we have an account of Attila, his court, and the moment the assassination plot unfolds. Attila, the master schemer, has outwitted the Roman emperor once again. The would-be assassin is a double agent, and Attila has known about the emperor's murderous plan all along. A more impulsive leader might take revenge, but Attila makes a strategic decision. With regular payments already coming his way from the Roman emperor, there's no reason to resort to violence. The Romans are treated as honoured guests and allowed to leave. The historian Priscus also reveals the family drama being played out in the royal court. Attila shows little interest in his two eldest sons, focusing instead on the youngest. Attila remained immovable, Priscus writes, except at the entry of Ernak, his youngest son, whom he gazed on with a calm look of affection. In the Huns' deeply superstitious culture, a prophecy might explain that favoritism. A shaman has predicted that when Attila's empire goes into decline, it will be his youngest son who restores it to its former glory. But Attila isn't just going to sit back and let this prophecy play out. He's still hungry for conquest, and now there's a new target in his sights, the Western Roman Empire. When families do battle over the throne, the end result can be the end of empire. In the 5th century, Attila the Hun is feared throughout Europe. But to finance his army, Attila needs territories to plunder. In 450, he turns his attention to the untapped riches of the Western Roman Empire. A few years earlier, Attila had fought for the Romans against some of the tribes living in Roman territory. Attila believed that if he attacked the Western Roman Empire, these tribes would seize the chance to rebel against the Romans again and leave him free to strip the empire of its riches. Attila crosses the Rhine and sweeps into southern Germany and northern France, sending shockwaves throughout the continent. But Attila now faces a formidable opponent, the Roman general Aetius. Rome has sent him at the head of a 50,000-man army to stop Attila in Europe. If he fails, Roman Gaul, today's France, will fall. And if they get through there, Rome itself is under threat. The two forces clash southeast of Paris, where Attila discovers that the Roman general is a master diplomat too. Aetius has crafted his own coalition of tribes from the territories Attila now threatens. Tribes like the Visigoths and the Alans lived within Roman borders. Now, rather than rise up against the Romans as Attila had hoped, Aetius persuades them to join forces with him against the Huns. Thousands of horsemen thunder into battle, and in a confrontation that continues into the night, the alliance engineered by Aetius inflicts heavy losses. Staring defeat in the face, Attila orders a funeral pyre to be built. But indecision between the Romans and their allies allows Attila and many of his men to retreat. Licking his wounds, Attila returns to his heartland in Hungary. It's his first military setback, and no doubt many expect him to give up on his campaign against the Western Roman Empire. Instead, the following summer, Attila attacks again, leading his army on a daring mission across the Eastern Alps into Italy.
Taking such a treacherous route allows Attila and his army to appear without warning here at Aquileia at the head of the Adriatic.
For centuries, its location had given Aquileia great strategic importance. It's a port town with a network of roads leading deep into Roman territory. It's also the last line of defense for keeping barbarians from the heart of the Roman Empire.
Well, the sea has long retreated from this harbour, but back in 452, this was a busy port. These docks would have been full of ships being loaded here. And as Attila came down out of the mountains, he saw this as a great prize, and he besieged the city and destroyed everything.
Aquileia had been described as one of the world's great cities. At its height, it had a population of 100,000. The Hun invaders reduce it to rubble and slaughter its people.
As Attila's army came in and torched the city and the basilica, very likely a huge beam came down from the ceiling and landed on the floor and burnt the mosaic. Now, for me, this is living history. That fateful day seems connected to right now because of this burn mark.
It's one of history's curious accidents that by destroying Aquileia, Attila unwittingly helps create one of the world's most beautiful cities, Venice. As his army goes on the rampage, survivors flee westwards and take refuge on a series of outlying islands. It's here that the floating city will eventually be built.
Aquileia marks the beginning of a fearsome campaign. Attila leaves the smouldering ruins of the city behind him and heads further west.
Victory over the Western Roman Empire now seems inevitable. As the Huns advance, Emperor Valentinian flees his capital Ravenna and seeks refuge behind Rome's defensive walls. Once again, it falls to the Roman general Aetius to try and stop Attila. But in the end, all he can do is slow his progress. Attila is now just a hair's breadth away from crushing an empire that has dominated the continent for centuries. But instead of attacking Rome, Attila agrees to meet an envoy sent by the emperor.
The man chosen for the job is Pope Leo, who enters the Hun camp and begs Attila to spare Rome and what remains of the empire. Shortly afterwards, the Hun leader turns his army around and heads for home, allegedly in awe of the holy man's appeal for mercy.
But there are other, more earthly forces at work that explain Attila's decision. Famine and malaria had spread right across northern Italy and now posed a threat to Attila's army if they continued further south. Many also believe that the Pope didn't come empty-handed. And before Attila turned back, he received another huge payment, this time to spare Rome. 47-year-old Attila marks his return to his Hungarian heartland by arranging a marriage. Although he had a favoured wife, the mother to his 3 heirs, it's said Attila married another 50 times, often to women from different tribes, so he could strengthen political alliances. His latest bride is from a Germanic tribe, and Attila marks the occasion with an extravagant feast. But the celebrations are short-lived. After a night of feasting, Attila takes his new bride to bed. But in the morning, he doesn't appear. Bodyguards break into his chambers,
where they find his new bride, Ildiko, lying across his body.
Attila the Hun, the scourge of God, is dead.
The body is covered in blood, but there are no obvious wounds, and the circumstances of Attila's death stir up suspicion and claims of treachery. Many speculate it's an assassination. But we know some of the details about the hours leading up to Attila's death. The celebrations are wild. Attila drinks heavily, and when he retires, his nose is bleeding. Often, the simplest explanation is the truth. The odds are Attila passed out and choked on his own blood. The year is 453, and Attila's marriage celebration has turned into his funeral. Attila's body is encased in 3 coffins, gold and silver to symbolize the plunder he spent a lifetime amassing, and iron to represent his military victories. As he lies in state, grieving horsemen sing laments.
But even before Attila's body goes cold, the battle for the succession begins. Attila united countless tribes with his charisma and personality. But will his sons have the same ability to keep the empire together?
Great empires often fall in the wake of bitter family power struggles. Attila the Hun is one of the greatest leaders of the 5th century, a brilliant warrior and a skillful politician. After laying waste to northern Italy and pushing the Roman Empire to breaking point, he returns to his Hungarian homeland, only to die on his wedding night.
The Huns had gone from obscurity to the most feared force in Europe and the Near East. But it's far from clear who should now lead them.
A decade earlier, Attila had broken with Hun tradition by killing his brother and taking sole control of the empire. By doing so, he'd also broken the code regulating matters of succession.
Now, there are 3 sons vying to inherit the empire, and no way of resolving their claims.
By leaving such confusion, anthropologist Andras Biro believes Attila, the master strategist, had made a tactical mistake that would now decide the fate of his empire.
Hogy az történt, hogy Attila rendkívül jó diplomata volt, és nagyon jól irányította a birodalmát. De olyan szempontból elkövetette egy hibát, hogy nem jelölte ki, hogy utána ki lesz tulajdonképpen, aki tovább viszi, ki lesz a trónörökös. Ennek természetesen nagyon hamar híre ment, és mivel ugye ez sokáig tartott, ezért a különböző addig legyőzött népek meglátták a szabadulás lehetőségét.
The eldest son, Ilak, takes control, triggering a dispute with his brothers, Dengizic and Attila's favored son, Ernak.
The empire is beginning to splinter. Ilak's brothers protest his single rule. Now, it's not land that they're after. They're wanting their own armies so they can fight their brother.
Their feud destabilizes the delicate alliance that Attila had so carefully managed. His negotiating skills had built an empire that depended on the support of tribes within Hun territory. Lacking their father's political touch, the 3 sons are about to lose that support. One of Attila's most trusted chieftains, Adarik, from a tribe in modern-day East Germany, has no faith in the new rulers and sees the chance to free his people from Hun control. Other tribes also break ranks and join the rebellion. A year after his father's death, Elac leads an army against the rebels at the Battle of Nadeo. A 6th century historian describes what takes place. And like a body with its head cut off, he wrote, now the limbs abandon all compassion for the suffering of the whole and turn against each other. Attila's eldest son suffers a devastating defeat at the hands of the rebel leader, Adarik, the man who'd once fought in his father's name.
"30,000 Huns are slain, and amongst them is Elac, brought down by Adaric's own sword. The Battle of Nido River is the point of no return. The great alliance of the tribes under the Huns has been broken."
Only a year after Attila's death, the empire has suffered a terrible blow. But 2 of Attila's sons remain. The oldest, Dingizic, tries to negotiate a deal with the old enemy, the Eastern Roman Empire. But no longer faced with a formidable Attila, the new emperor turns him down. Enraged, Dingizic marches his army eastwards to make the Romans pay on the battlefield.
Dingizic doesn't have his father's military skill either and is easily defeated. His severed head is brought here to the imperial capital, Constantinople. And it's displayed right here above this gate as a warning for everyone to see.
"20 years earlier, Attila had come to this city and secured a fortune to fund his empire. Now, his son's shocking downfall is a grim reminder of that empire's decline. Only Ernak, the youngest son, remains, unable to fulfill the prophecy predicting he would restore the empire's fortunes. He begs permission from the Roman emperor to settle near the Danube and live out his life in peace. With that, only 2 decades after Attila's death, his empire and his family disappear from the pages of history. The disintegration of Attila's empire is so rapid and so complete, little trace of it remains. No one knows where Attila's capital once stood, or where he was buried. It's said that far beyond the frontier of the Roman Empire, a river was diverted so the body could be laid to rest there before the river was returned to its natural course.
You know, I can understand the legend that honors this extraordinary man and ensures that his final resting place remains undisturbed for eternity. Today, on the Danube, his mystique continues.
His achievements live on in folklore, even though his empire turned to dust at the hands of his sons. But before writing this off as a failed dynasty, it's worth remembering the prophecy that predicted Attila's youngest son, Ernak, would restore the empire to its former glory. I've come to Heroes Square in Budapest. It celebrates Grand Prince Arpad, and in 896, he founded Hungary.
Most Hungarians will tell you with absolute certainty that Arpad was simply reclaiming his homeland staked out 450 years before by the Huns. In fact, they believe that Arpad was the direct descendant of Attila. Arpad is quoted as saying, "The land between the Danube and the Tisa was the land of my forefather, the mighty Attila." So could Attila's prophecy have actually come true? And his youngest son, Ernak, managed to reinvent the empire by simply surviving and carrying on the bloodline all the way to the Arpad dynasty and the founding of Hungary. Well, if that was true, then Attila's empire is still here with us today.